Our skin, it's our body's first line of defense. But did you know it's also home to millions of bacteria? So what happens when that delicate balance gets thrown off? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down the most common bacterial skin infections, from the really minor ones to the quite severe, all based on a medical teaching guide. Right then, let's get started. So here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the bacteria that live on our skin pretty happily. Then we'll meet the two main troublemakers. After that, we'll work our way through infections, from the superficial ones right through to the more serious stuff. And we'll finish up with a look at how these conditions are actually treated. It's a brilliant question, isn't it? I mean, our skin is absolutely teeming with microscopic life. So what's actually stopping it from causing us constant problems? Well, it all comes down to a really crucial distinction between two types of bacterial populations. Okay, so on one side, you've got your resident flora. You can think of them as the friendly, long-term residents of your skin's neighborhood. They're meant to be there, and they don't cause any bother. But on the other side, you've got the transient flora. Now, these are the passersby, the potential troublemakers. Usually, they're just moving along, but if you give them an opening, like a cut, a scrape, or a weakened immune system, they can very quickly become unwelcome invaders. Now, among all those potential troublemakers, there are two names that come up far, far more than any others. In fact, they're responsible for the vast majority of skin and soft tissue infections. And here they are, Staphylococcus aureus and Group A beta-hemolytic streptococci. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? So we'll just call them what they're more commonly known as, staph and strep. You're going to want to remember these two, because we'll be seeing them a lot as we go through the different types of infections. Right then, let's start at the surface. These are the infections that affect the outermost layers of the skin. They are, often the most common, and thankfully, usually the most straightforward to treat. So first up is impetigo. This is a highly contagious infection you often see in kids. It's caused by our usual suspects, staph or strep, and it starts out as these little blisters. The key thing to know about them is how fragile they are. They pop at the slightest touch, which is really important for what happens next. And this picture shows perfectly what happens next. After those little blisters rupture, they leave behind these very distinctive yellowish crusts. The source material describes them as honeycomb-like, which is a fantastic description. If you see this, it's the classic sign of impetigo. So to quickly sum up impetigo, it's caused by our main culprits, staph or strep. It typically shows up on exposed skin, like the face and hands. It is extremely contagious, which is exactly why it spreads so fast in schools and nurseries. And while it's usually not serious, you have to treat it, because on very rare occasions, it can lead to more severe problems. Next up, we have folliculitis. And as the name suggests, this is an infection of the hair follicles, those tiny pockets where each of our hairs grows from. It's usually caused by staphylococcus, and as we're about to see, it can range from just a minor surface irritation to a much, much deeper problem. And here you can see what it looks like. On the left, it's a more defined, larger spot in the armpit, and on the right, you've got a more widespread case on the torso. Basically, any place you've got hair, you can get folliculitis. It often just looks like a few small, red, pimple-like bumps. Now, it's really important to know that not all issues with hair follicles are the same thing. It can be very minor, like the superficial type listed here, or it can become a more chronic problem, especially in the beard area. But the most crucial point here is the last one, pseudofolliculitis. This looks and feels like an infection, but it isn't one at all. It's actually a mechanical irritation, what many people call razor bumps, and it's caused by shaved hairs curling back and growing into the skin. No bacteria needed for that one. So far, we've stayed right on the surface. But what happens when those same bacteria manage to push deeper into the skin's layers? Well, that's when the infections start to get more serious. And that brings us to furunculosis, or what most of us would just call a boil. The easiest way to think of a boil is as the next step up from folliculitis. The infection isn't just in the follicle anymore, it has now gone much deeper, spreading to the tissue around it and forming a really painful pus-filled lump we call an abscess. And if you get a whole collection of these boils all clustered together, you end up with this, a carbuncle. This is a much more serious situation, a larger and deeper infection, often with several different points where pus is draining out. This is definitely something that needs proper medical attention. Right, let's talk about two conditions that can look very similar but have one key difference, erysipelas and cellulitis. With erysipelas, the infection is more superficial. The giveaway, the real key, is its border. It's raised and really sharply defined, almost like someone's drawn a line on the skin. You can see exactly where the trouble stops. But then you have cellulitis. Here, the infection is much deeper, spreading through the tissue underneath. And because of that, its border is really indistinct and fuzzy. Think less of a line drawing and more of a watercolor painting where all the colors just bleed into one another. Now, in some rare cases, it's not actually the bacteria themselves, but the toxins they produce that cause the biggest problems. These toxins can get into the bloodstream and affect the entire body, leading to some very serious conditions. First is something called staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome, or SSS for short. This is caused by a specific toxin from staph bacteria, and it mostly affects newborns and very young children. What it does is cause the top layer of skin to peel away in sheets, so it looks like a severe burn or scald. It looks absolutely terrifying, but the good news is that with treatment, the prognosis is generally very, very good. Next is toxic shock syndrome, or TSS. Again, this is caused by a staph toxin. While it became widely known for its link to tampon use back in the day, it can also be triggered by things like wound infections or even surgical packing. The symptoms are severe: a high fever, a rash, and a dangerous drop in blood pressure, which is then followed by a very characteristic peeling of the skin on the palms and the soles of the feet. And finally, necrotizing fasciitis. Necrotizing literally means it causes tissue to die, which is exactly why this is such a dangerous infection. It's very rare, thank goodness, but it spreads with frightening speed along the fascia. That's the connective tissue that surrounds our muscles. This is an absolute medical emergency. It requires immediate surgery and really powerful intravenous antibiotics. So after all of that rather scary information, how are these infections actually managed? Well, the treatment strategy really depends on two things: how widespread the infection is and how deep it's gone. Let's look at a simple breakdown. This table lays it out pretty clearly. For just a few minor spots, a simple antiseptic wash might be all that's needed. For a more localized infection like impetigo, a topical antibiotic cream is usually the next step. If the infection is widespread, like with cellulitis or very deep, then you'll need systemic antibiotics, the ones you take by mouth. And finally, if there's a big collection of pus, like in a boil or carbuncle, it often needs to be surgically drained to let all that stuff out so it can actually heal. So, after going through all these different infections, what's the most important takeaway for actually preventing them? Well, this quote from the source material really says it all. While the bacteria might be the trigger, they aren't the root cause. The real predisposing factors are the things that weaken our defenses: poor hygiene, not eating well, and physical trauma to the skin. These are what open the door and practically invite an infection in. Ultimately, our skin is so much more than just a protective barrier. It's a direct reflection of our overall health. Taking care of our bodies is the single best defense we have. So it really is worth asking yourself, what is your skin telling you? Thanks for joining me.